Hello and welcome to week 5 of the Nevermoor series Readalong. I'm Jess Townsend, the author of the Nevermoor books, and this week, if you are reading along at home or rereading along as the case may be, then you should by now be about 2/3-ish of the way through Wundersmith, The Calling of Morrigan Croww, the second book in the series. I hope you're enjoying it. Before I jump in and start the recap, I just wanted to thank everyone again who entered the SILVERBORN proof giveaway, which the winner was announced last week. And just to remind you as well that that won't be the only giveaway. I'm going to be doing 2 more throughout the read along. So I'll announce the second giveaway next week when we finish Wundersmith, and the third one at the end of HOLLOWPOX. And I don't know what those giveaways will be yet. I've got an idea of what I hope they will be, but I kind of won't know until I announce it. So find out next week. Thank you so much for all of your lovely comments. I just wanted you to know that I have read all of them and I've replied and answered questions wherever I can, and you're all just a bunch of really good eggs. You're just really nice, just really, really nice. Yeah, shall we crack on with chapter 10? Chapter 10, Demands and Dragons. So we've rolled into Summer of 2. Things are kicking along okay-ish for Morrigan and Unit 919. They're all starting to figure out how to navigate this sprawling subterranean school. And Morrigan is at least happy with her 1 extra class on her timetable. She's less happy with the fact that Jupiter is increasingly called away to do goodness knows what for all of these different groups, including one she hadn't heard of, the Celestial Observation Group. And she thinks that he's off investigating these disappearances, but she's not really sure. But generally things are kind of fine until the demands begin to arrive. So further to their letter informing them very politely that they were being blackmailed, the first demand arrives, and it is for Thadia. It reads, Thadia Millicent McLeod, you have a fight scheduled in tomorrow afternoon's combat club against an unknown opponent. You will throw the fight. If you do not deliberately lose, we will reveal the secret of Unit 919. Remember, tell no one or we will tell everyone. Thadia point blank refuses. She's never thrown a fight. She's never lost a fight. She's currently the reigning champion of the One Sock Combat Club ever since she came to the Wondrous Society. And this is just very unappealing to her. Unfortunately for her, Unit 919 takes a vote and she's outnumbered. So she has to do it. And to her credit, she does it. The really unfortunate thing, though, is that her opponent, who is chosen randomly, so we know that the opponent doesn't necessarily have anything to do with who is blackmailing them, but her randomly chosen opponent is the worst possible opponent that she could have thought of to fight against. It's a boy called Will Gordy. Will Gordy was a mouthy boy from Unit 916 who liked to tell nonsense stories in which he starred as the biggest, baddest, and toughest hero in town, usually beating up whole gangs of bullies without breaking a sweat. Everyone knew they were nonsense because Gordy didn't have any real fighting prowess. His knack wasn't even anything to do with combat. He was a talented composer, but insisted on taking combat classes so that he could tell people outside the society that he was really a boxer. Morrigan knew Thadia couldn't stand him. So not only does she have to throw this fight, she has to lose in the most humiliating way to the most humiliating opponent that she could have thought of. And everyone in Combat Club is shocked, and Thadia's just livid, and she fumes for days and doesn't talk to any of her unit members after this. And then the second demand arrives, and it is for Francis. Francis John Fitzwilliam, you will bake and decorate a grand Caledonian coronation crest and place it on platform 919 by 6 o'clock tomorrow morning, and then return to your home immediately. If you do not follow these instructions exactly, we will reveal the secret of Unit 919. Remember, tell no one or we will tell everyone. The challenge here is that, as Francis explains, the Grand Caledonian coronation crest, I forgot what it was called myself, is this very difficult, complex cake with a lot of processes, and he is supposed to bake it by the following morning and leave it at the train station for this anonymous blackmailer. And he has a knife skills class the next day, a 4-hour knife skills class in the morning, so he's going to get no sleep and then possibly chop off a finger due to lack of sleep. So he's furious, and Morrigan offers to help, and she offers the assistance of the Hotel Ducalian chef, who has won 3 Royal Light Wing spatulas, which in Nevermoor would be like the equivalent of Michelin stars. And Francis is so offended by this. He says, I do not need help from some second-rate hotel fry cook. I mean, he obviously doesn't know about the spatulas. So Morrigan, her help is denied or rejected, but she is kind of heartened and shocked by the fact that Thadia and Francis have both agreed to go along with this, and they've both made these sacrifices for the good of the unit, and that sort of galvanizes something in her, and she decides, okay, well, if they can do that, then I'm going to find out who this blackmailer is. There's got to be a way to figure it out, and I'm going to figure it out. Chapter 11, The Stealth. This scene is set at the Hotel Deucalion during a party, probably my favourite party that Frank has thrown so far in the series. So I originally wrote a lot of this description, not the plot in this scene, but just the description of the party for Nevermoor, because it was going to be kind of Morrigan's first introduction to what life is like at the Hotel Deucalion, but there just ended up being kind of no logical place for it to be. So I pushed it down to Wundersmith and shoehorned it in here. And I'm glad that I did, because as I said, it ended up being kind of one of my favourite party themes that Frank's done so far. So they're in the Hotel Deucalion lobby, Morrigan and Jack. The whole enormous room had become a lagoon for the evening and was filled not with its usual gilded velvet furniture and potted trees, but small gondolas and canoes. The vessels carried raucous, glamorous partygoers, all dressed in nautical attire as Frank's invitation had instructed. The costumes were elaborate. So far, Morrigan had spotted 7 mermaids, 4 mermen, bands of sailors and pirates, a starfish, an oyster, and a violently purple, fully sequined octopus. So people really go all out for these parties. Frank, in this chapter or in this book, is kind of locked in this battle, this rivalry between the Deucalion and their rival hotel, the Oriana. So every weekend, these two hotels are throwing these huge, elaborate events, trying to outdo each other, trying to garner the most column inches in the society pages. And Frank is just getting increasingly over the top with these events. And the Hotel Oriana, that was actually named after a girl that I met in the United States on my first tour about 6 months before Nevermoor came out. She was just so cool and funny, and I just really, really liked her, and I loved her name. Oriana, Aurianna. And I asked her if I could borrow her name, and she was like, yeah, cool. She's just great. I can't even remember why she was so funny, but I just remember she really made me laugh. And then I have felt slightly bad about it since, because I think that Oriana just sounds very stately and elegant and glamorous, and I was like, oh, it's perfect for the name of a hotel. But then the way that this subplot with the hotel has gone is that the Oriana has become the enemy of the Deucalion, and so Frank says these terrible things about the Oriana and its staff, and there's always this slightly guilty voice in the back of my head, because I did name this hotel after a real person. So Oriana, if you're out there somewhere, I'm sorry, but also thank you for letting me borrow your name. It's perfect. So Morrigan and Jack are playing this game. So Jack, obviously being a witness, he has the ability to look at people and see splashes of colour or symbols around them, and he, as a teenager, is still kind of learning how to interpret these, and he's sort of showing that off to Morrigan. So there's a woman who has green fingers, which means money problems, and she's got a cross over her heart, which usually symbolises that there's been a death, so she's grieving one, and he concludes that she's angry that her younger brother inherited the family fortune. And so they're playing this game, and then Jack notices that there is a black cloud following Morrigan around, and he asks about it. And once she starts telling her problems, she just can't stop, and she tells him everything about the blackmail notes and Professor Onstold and Eloise and the Charlton Five and all of the missing people and the missing Magnificub, and she just lays it all out. And Jack doesn't try to solve anything for her. He just listens, and then she feels better. And she says, how does the black cloud look now? And he's like, yeah, it's better. It's a bit smaller. And instead of trying to pry or give her solutions or whatever, Jack does this really nice, very big brotherly thing where he gives her a sheet of dark, silvery black paper, as thin as a dried leaf, but soft and supple. And it is the black paper. So it's a thing that his friend invented at school, so basically to cheat on tests. But it's sort of bonded to Jack, this piece of paper. So if she writes on it and then says his full name, John Arjuna Korapati, 3 times, and burns it, then it will show up in his hand wherever he is, which is, and it's called the blackmail, funnily enough. And so he says, look, obviously stuff's not great at the moment. There's a lot going on. So if there's an emergency, only in an emergency, I know Jupiter's not around very much at the moment, so like you can contact me. Again, very nice, very big brotherly. They've really come along from book 1. They've really made some good progress, these two. And then they see a man enter the lobby, and Morrigan points at him and says, "What about him? Like, what do you see there?" The man she pointed to had just entered and was making his way across the lobby, leaping from rowboat to canoe to gondola as if they were stepping stones in a pond. Guests called out to him in greeting, applauding and shrieking with laughter when he nearly overturned a vessel. His own face remained sombre. He ran a hand through his waves of ginger hair. And it's Jupiter, and Morrigan calls out and he says, "Yep, I'll be there in 2 minutes," but he never makes it. Before he is able to get to them, these uniformed officers enter the Hotel Deucalion, and Fenestra approaches and says, "What are the Stink doing here?" But Jack knows that they are not the Stink, they are the Stealth, which is the kind of secret police that exists within the Wonder Society. So it's sort of their own law enforcement or investigation branch. And they're very intimidating and all dressed in black, and they come and they talk to Jupiter, and then he leaves with them. It's very clear that this is just yet another thing that he's being called off. He's not being arrested, he's being called off to help with something, and Morrigan thinks that it's got something to do with the disappearances. Jack shook his head, squinting at the black-coated squadron. They're definitely searching for something or someone, but this isn't weeks old. It's fresh. They've got that same fog around them as Jupiter, but theirs is thick and I don't know how to describe it, but it's sort of glittery, like a thunderstorm. It's new, so they don't know what it is, but whatever it is, it's something that has just occurred. Chapter 12, Devilish Court. So first of all, Morrigan asks around to every adult that she can think of, including the horrible Professor Onstold, and nobody seems to know anything about a new disappearance, and Jupiter's not there to ask. So putting that aside, in their next lesson, their next Decoding Nevermoor lesson with Mildmay, Unit 919 are learning about what he calls geographical oddities. So he's a member of the Geographical Oddity Squadron, which is a group within the Wonder Society whose job is to observe, monitor, classify what he calls geographical oddities, such as swindle roads, tricksy lanes, shadow streets, ghostly hours. Ghostly hours you learn about in the next book. Shadow streets we will also deal with eventually. Swindle roads he describes as an old-fashioned tool of scoundrels and highwaymen, a straightforward bit of geographical trickery in which one walks down one end of a laneway and comes out the other in a different location, sometimes miles away. So these are all over the Free State. They proliferated in the Age of Thieves, and I kind of think of them as a dangerous game of snakes and ladders. So you could, if you know where they are and you know how they connect across Nevermoor and across the Free State, you could use them as a tool, like as a shortcut. You could get from one side of the city to another like that, and you wouldn't have to take a long public transport trip. Or if you don't know about them, they take you by surprise, or if someone uses them to essentially trap you, then it could be hugely inconvenient to you. You could come out the other side and be faced with someone who's there waiting to mug you. So like everything in Nevermoor, kind of a double-edged sword. So they're all over the Free State. And Mildmay says, tricksy lanes, on the other hand, are a uniquely Nevermoorian bit of nonsense. Awfully inconvenient and occasionally quite frightening, but mostly harmless if you know what you're doing. Tricksy lane is a sort of catch-all term for the little alleys or walkways in Nevermoor that transform in some way once you're inside them. What do you mean transform? Morrigan asks. So he gives an example of you could walk in and suddenly you're facing the opposite direction that you were facing and you hadn't turned around. Or you could walk into a tricksy lane and the walls start closing in around you. And there are 3 different levels. So the way that they classify them is a pink alert, a red alert, or a black alert. And a pink alert is like, oh, you're suddenly facing the wrong way. This is a practical lesson. He takes them out into Old Town to practice in a tricksy lane, practice getting out of a tricksy lane safely. And the one that they practice in is called an ankle dangler. So it essentially just flips you upside down by your ankle and you have to sort of retreat to get out. So that would be an example of a pink alert. Pretty harmless. And pink alerts are described as nuisance level trickery presenting significant inconvenience on entry. A red alert, on the other hand, is high danger trickery and likelihood of damage to person on entry. So that could be one like that takes all of the air out of your lungs the further down the lane that you go. The third kind, the black alerts, he says those are the ones that we brick up. As soon as we know that something is a black alert, we close it off. No one can go inside because a black alert means death on entry. And an example of that he gives is one that famously, when you walked inside it, it would flip all of your organs from the inside to the outside of your body, obviously resulting in instant death. And so that's an example of a black alert. And he says there are 3 steps when you find yourself in a tricksy lane. 1, stay calm. 2, retreat. You have to just get back out of there. however you can. And number 3 is tell someone, because sometimes a pink alert could change to a red alert or vice versa. And so it's useful data basically for the Odd Squad or for the Nevermoor Council to collect and be able to have this constantly updating map, even though he says it's kind of a pointless task because they change so frequently and they also can move around the city. But he gives them this tool, this 3-step plan, and they all practice in the ankle dangler, and it's very, very fun and they all enjoy it. And then they're given the task of splitting into groups of 3 and going off using the map, the Nevermoor Council's map of Trixie Lanes, to find a pink alert in the North Quarter in Old Town to practice on. And so Morrigan, Hawthorne and Cadence take themselves off to Devilish Court. And Devilish Court, the trick in Devilish Court is nausea. So the further down this lane they get, the sicker they feel until they feel like they're going to throw up. Hawthorne takes his turn, success, done. Morrigan then takes her turn and something strange happens. She kind of intuitively, instead of wanting to retreat, which she knows she's supposed to do, she is driven to just push through the trick. She wants to see what is on the other side. Partly just intuition, partly curiosity, but also because she has remembered now something that Jupiter said on Spring's Eve, on the night that they went to see the angel Israfel. The lane that they went through that smelled like rotten eggs, he described as being a little bit tricksy. And that laneway, which was a little bit tricksy, was hiding something. It was hiding the Old Delphian, this secret location that not many people know about. And so she thinks, what is this tricksy lane hiding? And she pushes through despite feeling like she's going to vomit. And then she comes out on the other side. And it's this desolate courtyard that she's never seen before. There are overgrown tufts of grass, but there are also tents that are being assembled. And she starts hearing this conversation between 2 people in a tent. Sounds nefarious, sounds dodgy as. They're talking about an auction, and they're talking about this item that is going up for auction that they're hoping to get a really good price for. And this item is a menace, and it has injured one of these people. So we get the idea that this item is something alive. And Morrigan is eavesdropping and she's really curious, but then she feels something drop on her forehead, and it is black paint. And up above her, there is a man painting an archway with black paint, and it says, "The Ghastly Mark." And he sees her and she sees him, and he knows she's not meant to be there and she knows she's not meant to be there. And so she turns around and runs back the way that she came. And when she emerges through the trick on the other side, she doesn't even slow down. She sees Hawthorne and Cadence and she just says, "Run," and they run. Chapter 13, Fire and Ice. So they race all the way back to the Gates of Wunderslok, where they're supposed to meet Mildmay and the rest of Unit 919. And Morrigan tells Cadence and Hawthorne what she's just witnessed, and she gets up to the bit with the guy painting the sign, and Cadence says, "The Ghastly Mark? Do you mean the Ghastly Market?" Mildmay arrives just at this moment, overhears this conversation, and says, "Did someone mention the Ghastly Market?" Morrigan's instinct is to not tell him the same story that she's just told Cadence and Hawthorne, because she knows that she wasn't following the instructions that she was supposed to follow when she pushed through and went and witnessed this weird little scene. Luckily, Hawthorne jumps in and says, "Yeah, my brother's been teasing me all year," said Hawthorne quickly, cutting Morrigan off before she could say something else. He flashed her a look. He says, "Now I'm in the society, the Ghastly Market will be after me," but he's just jealous because he doesn't have a knack. And Mildmay looks highly amused by this and says, "The old traditions continue, I see, passing down the urban legend through the generations." And the urban legend turns out to be this thing called the Ghastly Market, which is like a black market where illegal, illicit things are sold and bought and traded. And those things could include human organs, animal parts, outlawed sorcery ingredients, weapons, etc., even Wundermors. And Morrigan is just horrified by this, and she asks, "What about Magnificats?" And of course she's thinking of Fenestra and how awful it would be for someone like Fenestra to be bought or sold, but she's also thinking of Dr. Bramble's Magnificat. And Cadence also says, "I've heard people say you could even buy a knack, that the Bonesmen would come and kidnap Wondrous Society members and steal their knacks to sell at the Ghastly Market." And Morrigan asks, "What are the Bonesmen?" Again, Mildmay seems sort of amused by all of this, and he says, "Well, look, it's bogeyman stuff. Supposedly, they used to emerge from dark, lonely places where carcasses were plentiful. Graveyards, battlefields, riverbeds, spontaneously assembling themselves from the jumbled leftovers of the dead. And Hawthorne says, yeah, that's what Homer tells me. He says that if I ever hear the click-clacking of bones, then I have to look out. And, you know, Mild May laughs this off and is like, look, it's just another part of the urban legend. It's all nonsense. Don't even worry about it. And off he goes. Morrigan turns to Cadence and Hawthorne and says, I don't think it is nonsense, because I'm pretty sure that I saw a bonesman the other day at the docks. And she describes to them what she saw. And they realise that if the bonesmen are real, then that must mean that the ghastly market is real. And she's putting these things together in her head, thinking of Cassiel and Paximus Luck and Dr. Bramble's Magnificub, all of these disappearances, and this ghastly market suddenly popping up out of nowhere. And she thinks, if we're going to find out what has happened to these people who have disappeared, then the ghastly market might be the best chance. And that means she's going to have to go back to Devilish Court. So they make it back to Woonsock, and Miss Cheery is waiting for them at Proudfoot Station, ready to take them home on home train. But before they can get out of there, this tornado of green hair and fury just barrels into the station and starts throwing accusations at Morrigan. It's Eloise, and she is clearly distraught because Alfie has gone missing. So now we know who that disappearance was. Alfie's gone missing, and supposedly he's left a note. And the note says, I can't stay any longer. I don't deserve to be in the society. Please find my W pin enclosed. I hereby withdraw from my unit. Regards, Alfie Swan. And the adults are kind of like, oh, sounds like Alfie might have left of his own accord. But Eloise isn't buying it. She says, Alfie loves me, he would never leave me, and what's more, he doesn't even know what the word hereby means. He can barely spell his own name, so there's no way she believes that this is Alfie's doing. She is convinced it is Morrigan's doing. She thinks that Morrigan has taken revenge on them because of the way that they bullied her, although she doesn't admit that bit out loud. Miss Cheery's the voice of reason, and she's trying to calm Eloise down. And she tries to take her hand and lead her away and say, listen, come up to Proudfoot House. Let's have a cup of tea and we'll sort this out. And Eloise, who, again, is distraught. She's very in her feelings. But no excuses, because she whips out one of her throwing stars. And whether or not it's deliberate or Miss Cheery just gets in the way, we don't really know. But she slices Miss Cheery's face. And Morrigan now sees red. Morrigan opened her mouth, a strangled shock of noise and fury rising up in her. But no sound came out. Instead, she felt a wave of anger such as she'd never felt before. It crashed over her, not like water, but lava, molten fire, burning her from the inside. The taste of ash sprang to the back of her throat, just like it had when the first blackmail note had appeared. Her sudden rage was a monster, clawing its way up from deep within her chest, from her lungs, searing the flesh of her throat and bursting out of her mouth, igniting the very air around her. She felt the wrath of 100 dragons. She would set the whole world aflame. A fireball sprang from Morrigan's lips. It burned through the air, uncontrolled and without a target, singeing Eloise's skin as it whooshed past her and shot straight into the domed canopy of trees overhead, setting the station roof ablaze. What? So everyone's screaming, Eloise is screaming, Morrigan is in shock, she doesn't know what just happened, and Mrs. Murgatroyd, the scholar mistress, the arcane scholar mistress, arrives just in time, and she uses what turns out to be her knack. She sends a column of water to douse these flames, and it turns to ice, and her normally murky eyes have turned a cold white, and there are ice crystals forming on her skin, so we get the idea that this is her special knack. And even worse, as she is then entering the station, she turns into Ms. Dearborn, who says to Miss Cheery, escort Miss Crow to the Elders' Hall. Dun dun dun. It wasn't the last dun dun dun. Chapter 14, The Elders' Hall. Morrigan is finally in the inner sanctum. So she's been curious about seeing this place ever since the trials, when she failed to get an invitation to the Elders' secret dinner, which was held in the Elders' Hall. This is not quite the circumstance that she would like to be seeing this place, though. She notices these 9 figures, though, while she and Miss Cheery are in the Elders' Hall alone, waiting to find out Morrigan's fate. She's looking around at these 9 gigantic statues, 15 feet tall, and they are all carved from different semi-precious gemstones and crystals, and they are all different figures. So there's a very sinister looking puppet master, and there's a pair of conjoined twins, and there's a woman with 8 limbs and all sorts of different things. And I'm not going to talk too much about that. It is important, and I imagine that quite a lot of readers have probably figured out the significance of these statues, or at least in part, but they are spoilerish, so I'm not going to talk too much about them. Look at me showing so much restraint. This is unheard of. So the adults all arrive. Ms. Dearborn enters. She sends Miss Cheery off to the teaching hospital because she's still bleeding. And the elders arrive, and Baz Charlton arrives, obviously, because he's Eloise's patron. And Professor Onstold arrives for some annoying reason. And just when Morrigan is thinking, oh, cool, all the people who hate me most in the whole world, Jupiter arrives. So she's so relieved. He's back. He is there at the moment when she needs him there the most to come and advocate for her. All of the other adults in the room are angry and annoyed about something. So Ms. Dearborn and Murgatroyd are arguing between themselves, doing these rapid quickfire changes from one into the other. Ms. Dearborn is saying this is a failed experiment. She says to the elders, I warned you, I told you that this would happen, she shouldn't be here. And Mrs. Murgatroyd agrees, yes, it is a failed experiment, but it's not the beastly girl who's failed, it is you who have failed her. She should have been in my school from the get-go. It says, I told you someone must teach the little beast her wretched arts, or the wretched arts will manifest themselves. They're having this argument. Baz Charlton is angry about Eloise's injury and also about Alfie's disappearance, which he's saying, Eloise is saying that Morrigan had something to do with Alfie disappearing. What's going on there? Elder Quinn sort of scoffs at this and says, oh, Alfie Swan, the boy who can breathe underwater. Yeah, he's been failing all of his classes all year long, and he quite obviously just wasn't prepared for the amount of work that it takes to be in the Wondrous Society. And listen, the moment that he fully understands how much privilege he has to be here, he will come crawling back. We're not worried about Alfie Swan. What the elders are worried about is the fact that Eloise has just blown the whole missing persons thing wide open. She says, the elders and I have been working all year long to try to contain this missing persons thing, and one dramatic schoolgirl has just ruined it for all of us. Elder Saga says, none of this is important. What we are here to discuss is what we're going to do with the Wundersmith. Baz Charlton makes a suggestion. He says, activate her safeguard. Morrigan doesn't know what this means. She knows she has a safeguard. She doesn't really know what a safeguard does. And she certainly doesn't know what it means to activate. But apparently all of the adults in the room do, because they react so strongly to this. There is an intake of breath from everyone who is not the idiot Baz Charlton. And Jupiter is clearly livid and has to work very hard to rein himself in. But he says to Baz, think of what you are saying. For once in your mediocre life, Charlton, just think about the words that drop from your cretinous mouth before you utter them. Morrigan is sent out to wait in the hallway while the adults have their strop amongst themselves, and Hawthorne is waiting for her outside the elders' hall, and he says, did you know you could breathe fire? Even through her haze of worry and confusion, Morrigan dimly registered how ridiculous the question was, and it annoyed her, and she was oddly grateful that this, at least, was normal, that Hawthorne could still ask silly questions and she could still be annoyed by them. Don't you think I might have mentioned a small detail like that? So the two of them are stressing about whether she's going to be kicked out of the society, and they overhear bits and pieces from this argument, and they hear Jupiter saying, stop talking about her as if she's a monster. So who knows what's going on in there. But she's called back in, and the upshot of all of this is that the elders say, listen, we believe that you did not do this with malicious intent. However, you are clearly a danger. It's too risky to have you here with the other students and the other society members. So until we can figure this out, until we know what to do, you are banned from WUNSOC. So we're revoking your station access, and you need to leave immediately. And also, from now on, until further notice, you will have your lessons at the Hotel Deucalion, and Professor Onstold will come to the Deucalion to teach. Lucky Morrigan. So Morrigan and Jupiter leave WUNSOC together in a carriage, headed home to the Hotel Deucalion, and once they're alone, the first thing out of Jupiter's mouth is an apology for having been so absent in this period that is clearly quite difficult and tumultuous for Morrigan, and she instantly forgives him because she can tell that it's genuine. She can tell he's exhausted by whatever's going on in the background, and also she's just kind of sick of holding a grudge about it. Neither of them knows why she is suddenly breathing fire. Morrigan does speculate that maybe she's turning into a dragon, and Jupiter's test for this is, do you feel scaly? Have you got talons? Do you feel a sudden urge to hoard treasure? And because her answer to all of those is no, he concludes that no, you probably are not turning into a dragon. And he reassures her that, look, the summer holidays are about to start. You're going to have 6 weeks at home of just fun, chill, relaxation, and Elder Quinn will come round. She is not an unfair person, and don't even worry about it. Things will be fine. You'll go back to school. Don't stress. And Morrigan tells him about the ghastly market, because that is the most important thing on her mind. He listens to the whole story, and at the end he says, Devilish Court? Okay. He writes down the name and says, I'll look into it. More than anything else, it was these 4 words that eased Morrigan's jangled nerves that afternoon, that undid some of the residual tension from what had been her worst day since arriving in Nevermoor. Because even if the rest of the world was suspicious of her, Jupiter never would be. He believed her, he trusted her. And this is one of those occasions, as I've said before, he doesn't always get it right, but this is an occasion that he's gotten it right, because he didn't doubt her and he didn't say, oh, why were you doing that? That's so dangerous. You were supposed to be following instructions. He just listens to the story and he says, yep, I believe you and I'm going to look into that, which is exactly what she needs to hear in that moment. After that, all of the things that have been jangling around in her head of the whole stuff about the Charlton Five and the blackmail and blah, 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 it just suddenly fades into the distance and she doesn't feel like talking about that stuff. Instead, she decides to tell him all of the good things that she hasn't had a chance to tell him. She talks about how wonderful Miss Cheery is and how much she loves her decoding Nevermoor class and how good she is at it. And she talks about how curious it is that out of everyone in her unit and possibly everyone in the Wonder Society, she's the only one who seems to be able to resist Cadence's mesmerism, including him because he still doesn't remember who Cadence is. Jupiter listened closely to every word and reacted exactly the right way in exactly the right places. And it was all so familiar and so comfortable, so reassuringly normal, that the question Morrigan really wanted to ask, the question that had been burning at the back of her throat, threatening to burst out of her mouth like dragon fire since she'd watched him stare down Baz Charlton in the Elders' Hall, burned itself down to ashes before she could find a way to ask it. She swept it into a quiet corner of her mind and let it sit there, ignored and unanswered. And if she ignored it for long enough, maybe it wouldn't be important anymore. Maybe it would never be important again. Maybe the question, what's a safeguard for, could sit under that pile of ashes in her mind, safe and quiet and unimportant forever. Maybe. Probably not. Chapter 15. You've never seen anything more bizarre. So it's the summer holidays, and like last summer, Jupiter has been promising to take Morrigan to the Nevermoor Bazaar, which is the market festival that runs all summer long. And like last summer, he keeps getting called away to do more urgent, more important, more Jupiter things. But this time, he is smarter and he says, go with Hawthorne's family. And so we get to meet the Swifts for the first time. So as I said, we were supposed to meet them at the Black Parade in the first book, but they got pushed down the road a bit, and here they are in Wundersmith at the Nevermoor Bazaar. So there's Kat and Dave, Hawthorne's mum and dad. There is Homer, his 15-year-old brother, who is a student at the Conservatory of Thought, where all of the students take a vow of silence. So he can only speak one day of the year, and the rest of the time he carries a blackboard around his neck, mostly for sarcasm purposes. And we also meet baby Dave, whose name is Davina, but everyone calls her baby Dave, and she's 2 years old. And according to the rest of the Swifts, she is the far superior member of the family, and they all just adore her and think she's the best thing since sliced bread. Morrigan's like, jury's out for me. All I've seen this kid do is spit up milk and squeal at a dog, but sure. It's a good thing that the Swifts do actually adore baby Dave this much, because we will see she becomes something of a tyrant as she grows older. We'll see that in the next book. But like a good tyrant, a cute little tyrant, the cutest kind of tyrant. And the only Swift who is missing is Helena, the eldest sister, who is a student at the Gorgonhal College of Radical Meteorology, which is in the perpetual eye of a cyclone, and so she can't travel in and out very easily, and so a lot of the time she's just at school. I love writing any scene with the Swift family. I really enjoy their dynamic, and particularly Kat and Dave. So Kat is basically like an adult version of Hawthorne. She's silly and fun and a bit wild. I mean, that's Kat. And then Dave is kind of the more safety conscious, sensible parent who's keeping everyone together and making sure everyone follows the rules. And when I originally wrote the first ever scene with the Swift family, which would have been probably like a decade and a half ago at least, that dynamic was reversed. So Kat was the sensible, safety conscious, like the more boring parent, I guess you would call it. And Dave got to be like the fun, silly, goofy guy. And I very quickly recognized that I was making a boring choice, or what felt like a boring choice to me, because that feels like quite a tired dynamic. We see that quite a lot in sitcoms, and like particularly sitcoms when I was growing up, like in the 90s and the early 2000s. Honestly, probably a lot of them now as well. Like you often see this dynamic where the mum is like carrying the mental load for everyone, and she's being the sensible, safe one who's, you know, much more serious, and the dad gets to be the fun, silly guy. And to be fair, like it's a stereotype for a reason, because I think that's often the dynamic in real life, with mums carrying like a lot of the mental load in families. But I just felt like I can make a different choice. I can make a more interesting choice. And I mention all of this mostly for writers. So like we are all susceptible to our unconscious biases about any number of things. And as a writer, it's often really helpful to, like, when you write something, don't just accept the first choice that you've made. Go back and read through it and try and look at it through a different lens, and try and recognize when you've made choices almost on autopilot, and then see if you can subvert them in some way. And often that just like makes for something that's a bit more fun to write, and is a slightly more unusual thing for the reader or the viewer to experience. And that's my talk about subverting unconscious biases, or whatever, I don't know. Okay, so they go into the bazaar. Morrigan, Hawthorne, and Homer are told to stay together and meet back at midnight. They instantly split because Homer is a 15-year-old who doesn't want to hang out with his 12-year-old brother, and vice versa. So Morrigan and Hawthorne head off, and they're looking at this map of the festival. And this festival is huge. It's the real estate it takes up is basically all of Old Town, which is the really big like center of Nevermoor. And even if it was just that, it would be pretty enormous. But every little precinct and every different area on the map is doing double, triple, sometimes quadruple duty. The map is like flickering in and out. So Morrigan sees one area that is like a cheese market, and then it's a dog show, and then it's a fire twirling show. And the way that happens is by magic. There are like magicians, like and illusionists who she can see. Kat and Dave have pointed out to her they're like executing this magic and illusion. Basically, like between each section is like a curtain, and you walk through a curtain to get to a new little area or a precinct, and you might walk through and you're in a tea party, and then if you exit and come back through the curtain again, you might be in a tango lesson, and then if you do it again, maybe you're in a prayer meeting or something. It's just layers on layers on layers, and Morrigan is just fascinated. There are so many things to see there. What are some of the things? There's an avian market with all of these many different coloured birds, a flower market and a lantern market, and a fish auction, a prayer meeting, a vigorous debate on animal rights, a farmer's market full of fresh fruit and vegetables, then a carnival with a carousel, a ghost train, a jumping castle, a sideshow alley. There's a nail salon and an arena for unicorn-based equestrian events. There's just anything that she could think of, and a lot of things she never would think of. And she really wants to stop and take it all in. But Hawthorne is a man on a mission. He is going for his favourite place of all that he goes to every year. And of course, it is an area called Sweet Street, which is just full of all like sweet things that Hawthorne loves. So they have to they have to eat their way through a fairy floss curtain to get in there. And then there's bonbons and donuts and caramel and blah, blah, blah. And Morrigan tries a little of everything and then gets sick of it. And she leaves Hawthorne, who is not yet sick of it. And she goes and looks through the next area, which is a little fortune-telling court. And then wanders into the next one, and nothing. Everything is dark. She can't see. She can't hear. She's yelling for help, and she can feel her like voice vibrating, but she can't hear anything. And she's starting to panic, and she feels someone grab her and touch her face all over and then push her aside, because she obviously wasn't the person they were looking for. And then she feels someone else grab her hand, and it is a child's hand. It is like hers. And she thinks, oh, thank goodness, that must be Hawthorne. And this person drags her out back into light and noise, and she's so relieved, and she turns around to Hawthorne. But it's not Hawthorne. It's Cadence, who says, it's real. Her eyes blazed with fear and excitement. The ghastly market. Morrigan, it's real, and it's happening now. Is this a dun-dun-dun? Dun-dun-dun. No, it's not a dun-dun-dun. I'll save my dun-dun-duns for real dun-dun-dun moments.